So welcome everybody, and welcome to this Stay Nimble webinar, which is Modern Women Adopting a Healthy Mindset in the Workplace. And I'm Jennifer Harper, I'm Head of Coaching here at Stay Nimble, and we're running today's webinar in partnership with Jayne Global Business School and the University of East London, with whom Stay Nimble is delivering the Stay Nimble MBA. And I'm joined today by my fellow career coach, Jayne Saul-Paterson, and by Jayne's VP of Enterprise, Raffi, both of whom we will meet in a moment or two. But before we go on, I just want to cover a couple of basic housekeeping points so that we all get the most out of the 45 minutes or so that we've got together today. So as you can see on the screen, that the event is being recorded, and everybody who has registered for the webinar will receive a copy of the recording afterwards. It's always lovely to see faces when we're speaking, but if you prefer not to have your camera on, then feel free to have that switched off. That's absolutely fine, because I'm aware it's being recorded and some people aren't comfortable with that. If we could ask everybody just to have your microphone on mute during the presentation, it just helps to prevent some of the background noise coming through. And we will have a Q&A session at the end, hopefully if we have time. So if you have questions arising during the session, please feel free to pop them into the chat box and we'll pick those up later on. And if you prefer to ask your questions directly, then at the end you can unmute and ask questions as we go through the Q&A as well. So we'll just do a very quick formal introduction before we get going. So Jayne, I wonder if I could ask you just to say a quick hello to everybody, please.
Oh, hi. Hello, everyone. So I'm Jayne Saul-Paterson, and I'm one of the Stay Nimble career coaches. I've been working with Stay Nimble for about 3 or 4 years now. I have a background in executive coaching, career coaching. I'm a qualified careers advisor and I'm a trainer. And my areas of specialism are career development, resilience, and sort of race and gender equity.
That's great. Thank you for that. And Caroline, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. It's good to be here. Caroline Raffi. I'm joining you from sunny Southern California, Los Angeles. VP of Enterprise with the SUR Global Business School, and focusing on individuals' career progression, and personally very passionate about especially women in leadership and closing the gender gap in the workplace.
Excellent, thank you so much. And as I said at the start, I'm Head of Coaching here at Stay Nimble. So I head up the team of coaches, all of whom are fully qualified career guidance practitioners. We are all members of the CDI, the Career Development Institute, which is the UK body for professional career guidance practitioners. And we're all mental health first aid trained. I also have a qualification in counselling, and in my previous working career, I was also a journalist and worked with UK national newspapers and magazines as well. So I've got a fairly broad background as well. So I'll just introduce Stay Nimble as well to those of you who aren't familiar with us as an organisation. So Stay Nimble is an award-winning social enterprise company, and we deliver on-demand one-to-one career coaching with, as I say, all our qualified career coaches. We have developed a number of online tools, resources that everybody who is registered with Stay Nimble has full access to 24/7. Many of these resources have been developed by our coaches with sector knowledge as well. So that there are lots of self-development tools in there, exercises, articles. We have other webinars, podcasts, that sort of thing as well. So it's a broad range of resources. And we're very proud of the fact that we have supported more than 18,000 people to date to find work that really, really matters to them, that's meaningful to them. And this will be people that are in all sorts of states within their career. It may be that they're looking to career change, to pivot to something else. It may be that they're at a bit of a crossroads. They may be completely stuck. There may be people that have taken time out from work and are trying to re-enter, again, for a number of reasons. It might be through ill health, taking a conscious career break, or it may be people returning to work after having been an at-home mum or dad as well. So there's lots of reasons why people take time out from work, but we're very equipped to support individuals to work out where they want to go from there and to get back into the workplace as well. And just to give you a little bit of flavour with regard to the type of support that we can be offering you, and that's whether you're going through something like the Stay Nimble MBA, or if you are wanting to look at your career options in general. So everybody would work one-to-one with their qualified career coach, and that means that we are tailoring the support that we are delivering for you and to you. And through working one-to-one with your coach, you're looking at things like your strengths, your skills, your values, what's really important to you, what's important with regard to your personal life and your working life. We also look at mindset as well, which is obviously linked to today's topic. So it's really looking at what you're passionate about as well, where you see yourself fitting. And we look at action plans, and your coach is also there to support you with your action plan to make sure that you're staying on track as well. And as I said at the start, the 24/7 resources are available to you as well. So just as a point of interest to mention at this stage as well, before I hand over to Caroline, who'll tell us a little bit more about Jayne, details of the Stay Nimble MBA will be sent out to everybody after the webinar, along with the recording of the webinar and the slide deck that you're seeing here as well. So that will all come through to you after the event itself. So Caroline, can I pass over to you, please?
Thank you. Yes. So I'm just going to jump in and explain how DUSTER is different than traditional universities. We provide access to the world's most industry-applied accredited degrees. We're focused specifically on students' career advancement. So, while other universities, traditional universities, might focus on publishing, research, all that, we don't do any of that. It's solely focused on individuals' career progression, and we are very mindful of overcoming barriers such as time and cost, especially for students who have management experience, they've been in leadership roles. Another thing that separates us, from traditional universities, is the fact that our students learn from over 250 world leaders. We have over 50 women world leaders that are part of our faculty faculty group, from CEOs to entrepreneurs, professors, humanitarians, public sector leaders. So we're very proud of that. And also we're proud that our patron, Her Excellency Joyce Banda, is one of only 2 female elected presidents from the entire continent of Africa. And our first university chancellor was the first first female prime minister of Australia. So needless to say that closing the gender gap in workplace is weaved within our culture.
Excellent, thank you for that. That's great to see so many women on the screen as well, which is fantastic. Okay, so just a very quick look at the agenda and what we'll be covering during the session today. And obviously our lead topic is adopting a healthy mindset in the workplace. So with that in mind, we'll start by looking at sort of flipping that and looking at what is an unhealthy mindset. And the self-doubt that that can be created as a result of that unhealthy mindset. Caroline's also going to touch on mental health and why that's also important with regard to the mindset, and in particular women's mental health. We'll then pass on to Jayne, who'll start to look at emotional intelligence, how we can capture those negative thoughts that might present, and in particular looking at imposter syndrome as well. We'll be looking at how to manage that inner critic that we all have, and also how to pull on your inner champion, which is going to challenge that inner critic, and how to put that inner champion into action. And then we'll be finishing with Caroline, who will look at knowledge being power. And hopefully if we've got time at the end, we'll have time for a couple of questions as well. I'll keep an eye on the time and hopefully we get there with that. So just as I said, to start with, we've got a lot to cover, so we'll get going with starting to look at the adopting a healthy mindset in the workplace, and looking specifically to begin with at exactly what is an unhealthy mindset. So you can see on the screen, we've got a number of different phrases here. Some of them you might be very familiar with. I know I certainly am. Phrases such as, I can't, what if I fail, I'm not good enough, I should. It's coming through the work. We can put a lot of pressure on ourselves there as well with that, but we all have this little voice in our heads, whether we like it or not, that can shout out some of these statements to us, sometimes at the most inconvenient times. And that's what falls into that unhealthy category. It's these negative thoughts that come through, as I say, and that's what can fall into the self-doubt, the imposter syndrome. So I think the first thing to acknowledge is that we all have these thoughts at different points. So it's perfectly normal for that. However, it's when those thoughts start to get in the way of us moving forward or trying new things, that's when it can potentially become a problem. And that's when it's deemed to be unhealthy. So we'll speak more about that inner voice in a few moments, but I think at this stage, it's also important to acknowledge that we're going to challenge ourselves, and we're going to challenge our own thinking when considering how to adopt that healthy mindset, and also importantly, how to maintain that mindset as well. And this is relevant whether you are going to be embarking on studies, whether you are going to be seeking promotion within your existing workplace, whether you're going to be applying for new jobs, or again, if you're coming to that point of wanting to consider a career change as well. So the mindset is really important, whatever stage you're at this moment in time. So it's also important to look at why this unhealthy mindset can become a problem. And we've got some statistics here on screen. And there's been a lot of research done into why the unhealthy mindset can be an issue. And one of those is relating to productivity in the workplace, and how an unhealthy mindset can impact on that. And sometimes that can come from being within a toxic work environment. But evidence shows that a huge amount of impact can be had, 65%, which is a huge number here. And that can impact on you personally, but also within the organisation that you're working with. So it can be things like if staff members are experiencing low confidence, experiencing that imposter syndrome, also staff disagreements that can come through in the workplace as well, and that can cause additional issues coming through as well. And all of these can then impact on employee turnover as well. And again, evidence shows that, again, a huge amount, 50% of staff turnover is due to stress, toxic work environment, and some of that is coming from that unhealthy mindset as well. So it should be, this is probably quite a good point to stress that stress itself is, again, perfectly normal, and we all experience it, but we have good stress, which is where that adrenaline can come through, and that's what can push us through in difficult situations, and it can also give us that motivation to keep going. But we can also have what we would deem to be bad stress, which can result in burnout. So it's important that we become aware of what stress we're experiencing and how it's impacting on us. So with that, it's little surprise that we can learn that unhealthy mindset, that stress can impair our communication and collaboration within a team. And this is where Dweck's research into fixed mindset and growth mindset really comes into play, with regard to that unhealthy mindset getting in the way of the growth and progression for both individuals and for businesses. And again, that fixed mindset can be captured through the statements such as, I can't and I'm not good enough as well. And unsurprisingly, again, this can all knock on to our own health and well-being, which Caroline will speak about a little bit more about in a moment. Again, that can come through with regard to our physical health, mental health as well. And the 2020 research that we've quoted on screen does indicate that, again, a huge amount, £45 billion per year, is what it costs UK employers alone through poor mental health within the workplace. So we can start to see why an unhealthy mindset can impact on us personally, but also can impact on business as well, which is why it's so important to talk about it and to address it as well. So I will now pass on to Caroline.
Thank you. So why is women's mental health important? I mean, mental health is important regardless. But why are we focusing on women's mental health? And disclaimer, I'm not a physician. But what we know is that as women, there are certain disorders that we deal with that is unique to us, and specifically because of hormonal changes. You know, whether it's during pregnancy, around the time of period, during menopause, we've all experienced, you know, mood swings or whatnot. So these are biological changes, right, that it directly affects our brains to create, you know, depression, anxiety, you know, the aches. We all go through them, you know, differently, some worse, some not so bad, but it affects us. And I'm going to give a shout out to my brother, Dr. Edwin Raffi. He focuses on women's mental health. He was saying that if men were going through this, we would have billboards and flyers and, you know, days off. But for us, we just, you know, we've learned to deal with it. So what's important here is when you know about this and when you actually pay attention to it, we have to learn to manage the challenge, right? Whether it's physical activity, healthy diet, getting enough sleep, mindfulness, meditation, that will all help us achieve our goals and setting the right expectations and staying positive. One thing that I keep telling myself is when it's during that time, again, when you're aware of it, it's like, don't make any life-changing decisions, because again, you're going through, it's hormones, you know, it's science, it's a biological change. So it's about being smart about it and know to manage it, to take over it rather than letting it taking over you. And then, because really what it is healthy mindset is not about dismissing it, it's about embracing it, right? And once we have that, then we can go about you know, our day and managing it with having a healthy mindset. Not to mention, you know, as women, we deal with biases, maternal bias. Oh, you're a mother now, you're not that interested in your job anymore, or likable bias, you know. You're, as a woman, you're supposed to be more understanding and be liked rather than being assertive. So again, having knowledge and being smart about it and managing it, it would be very helpful when it comes to having a healthy mindset.
Okay, we pass to Jayne.
So I'll just follow on from that. Really important points that you're making, Caroline, about, you know, mindset, what impacts, you know, as women, the hormonal changes that may impact our mindset. And the key is managing it. So I think a really good framework to look at this moment is emotional intelligence, because we think about mindset as the way we view ourselves and our abilities. Our mind and our mindset can be influenced by those emotions, you know, and vice versa. So if we have an understanding really of how we manage our emotions, that does really have a significant impact on how we manage our mindset. And so this concept, emotional intelligence, it's basically the ability to recognize, understand, and manage emotions in ourselves and in others. And it was a term that was popularized by Daniel Goleman back in the 90s. He wrote a book of the same name called Emotional Intelligence, and he was a science journalist for the New York Times. He had a psychology background. And it was a really powerful book because he argued that emotional intelligence was more important than IQ. So the typical kind of assessment of intelligence, actually how you manage your emotions and how you relate to other people and manage your emotional relationships with them, that's what's key in life. He said that, IQ is probably largely genetic and maybe not, it doesn't change much over time, but your emotional intelligence, it can develop over time. And so he divided, he developed this emotional competence framework with some other people, and they looked at dividing it into four areas. One is self-awareness, so how you manage yourself, how you manage your emotions. It's also, as I've said here, it's to do with understanding your strengths and your weaknesses. And the more you have self-awareness, the greater it sort of increases your ability to make an assessment, realistic assessment of yourself, but also to be confident in your abilities as well. And in the book, he quotes about a survey that was done of some top executives and really outstanding leaders. And what they all had in common was emotional intelligence. And in fact, it was twice as important as the technical skills that they may have developed over time to get into those positions of power, but actually it was the emotional intelligence that stood them out. And so, this is why we're looking at it as being really important as a set of competencies that we have to develop, and we particularly as women have to develop, particularly as we go into leadership roles. And just the final point on here is that it's not a given that you will develop emotional intelligence over time. It is a set of skills and competencies, and the key is that in order to really develop all of these skills is to reflect on your life experiences, the things that happen to you, when things go right and when things go wrong, to be able to evaluate yourself and how you are responding to those situations, get good, honest feedback, and take on board that which you really understand and think that can make a difference to yourself, and just always be committing to sort of continual change and improvement, and see the impact that then that will have in your life, and particularly on your way of approaching life and your mindset in life as well. So I'm going to pass over to Jennifer, and she's going to talk about one of the biggest challenges to a healthy mindset, which is the inner critic.
Thank you, Jayne. Thank you. Yes, as we mentioned earlier, we all have this inner voice in our head, and that is considered to be our inner critic. And it's really important to listen to this voice and really to consider whose voice is it that you're actually hearing, and is this what you really think of yourself, or are you hearing the voice of, for instance, a former boss, a partner, or a family member? The reason I'm saying that is because we are all impacted by the thoughts and behaviours of others around us, those who we live with, that we socialise with, and who we work with as well. And it's so important to be aware of the labels that others put upon us, and to distinguish that against what is factual about us and what is perceived about us, and that's the perceptions of other people. And sometimes that can creep into that inner critic that we have as well. And this is where those thoughts we consider right at the very start to come in, the I can't, what if I fail, and so on. And as we can see from the diagram here on screen, the inner critic can stop us in our tracks. It can make us feel really stuck. It can impact on how we feel about ourselves, and ultimately it can influence our behaviour. So start to look at these individually. In the stop phase, our inner critic may prevent us from doing what we would really want to do, what we would really like to do, prevent us from trying new things, and can really get in the way of us starting to form new habits or taking on new challenges. The stuck phase can keep us contained within what has become our comfort zone. And again, that's preventing us from dipping our toe into other areas. And sometimes it can even prevent you from inquiring about other things, new things. And it can really impact on what we come to the next part, how we feel about ourselves. And that's where it can have impact on our confidence, our self-belief, our self-esteem, which can be really quite debilitating as well. So it really need to be very conscious of how that inner critic is impacting on us. Finally, that impacts on how we behave as well. And it might be things such as worrying excessively. Sometimes we can be slightly obsessed by trying to prove that inner critic wrong, as well as doing things like overworking. We're trying to overcompensate, that sort of thing. And just even as I'm saying that out loud to you, what's coming across to me is the amount of time, the amount of energy this takes in order to be battling with that inner critic, and to be working against it as well. And there's a lot there that's impacting on that thought process overall. So the overall knock-on of all of this, of having this inner critic, is it can lead to imposter syndrome, which again can be very debilitating and holding us back. And Jayne's going to pick up on that point with regard to imposter syndrome. Oh, Jayne, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. I've heard that a few times over the last few years. Yeah, so we hear a lot more about this term imposter syndrome, but actually it was developed by two psychologists, Clance and Ims, in a 1978 paper that they wrote on imposter phenomenon. And what they were basically doing was researching. It was very kind of looking at themselves and what was happening for themselves. You know, they were, you know, both had PhDs, but they were noticing how they were discounting their achievements. And so they researched really high achieving women who found it really difficult to accept their sort of professional and academic accomplishments and were constantly undermining themselves. And so this syndrome is now sort of loosely defined, as it says here, you know, doubting your abilities, feeling like a fraud, or that failure is imminent. And if you think about when people experience it, it's often perhaps when they've just gained a promotion, maybe they're starting in a new job, a new project, or even a new course, and those sort of feelings come up, doubt, when that's happening. And it's almost as though people feel that they don't deserve to be in the position that they are, and they live in that fear of always being, you know, are they going to be exposed as a fraud? And as you can imagine, it is something that can disproportionately affect women and high achieving people who find it difficult to accept their accomplishments. And it's common as well. I mean, there are some studies that have shown that, you know, sort of 70 to 80% of people at some point in their lives will experience this. And, you know, some well-known women have spoken about it. You know, we saw the quote earlier by Maya Angelou, but also people like Michelle Obama, Sheryl Sandberg. Many women have spoken about the problems they have with, you know, this imposter syndrome. And research basically has linked it, as you can imagine, to low self-esteem, low self-efficacy, feeling that you can't achieve things, maybe perfectionism, self-worth, family expectations, societal expectations, and also that anxiety. I mean, if you think for a minute where the family expectations might come from, you know, if you come from a family where achievement was valued above everything else, you know, and you were always kind of like praised if you did well, but also maybe there was that alternative view that sometimes you were overpraised and then you were criticized quite a lot. And what that can do is lead to those feelings of as an, you know, later in adulthood, of feeling like a fraud or feeling inadequate. And I think what's really important to remember is that this isn't just the mild self-doubt that we may all get when we are being pushed out of our comfort zone or into something unfamiliar. This is this chronic habit, and that's the key. It's chronic. It's constantly dismissing yourself and putting yourself down, and that takes its toll. It takes its toll on your mental health, and it has been, as you can imagine, linked to burnout. And I think one important thing just to say, because the phenomenon was really written about in the 70s, and it was probably at a time where people weren't talking about the impacts of work environments where there was, systemic racism or gender bias or xenophobia or any other biases. And so really, when we think about it, and there's this kind of sort of take on it, is that actually women and people of color might actually find themselves in toxic environments. And if they start to develop those feelings where their intelligence is being underestimated or their competence is being underestimated, that can lead to feelings of self-doubt and low confidence. So what we have to remember with this is that it's not just about the individual. It's not about fixing the individual or you as a person fixing yourself if you're in one of those environments, or if you're in an environment at work that doesn't play to your strength, that doesn't give you a sense of belonging, that actually it's the environment that needs to change, and we need to have environments which develop equity and inclusion and embrace diversity as well, and different ways of being, because as women we may have different leadership styles to the norm, and for that to be accepted as well. So I think that that's kind of key to say about imposter syndrome.
Okay, thank you, Jayne. There's lots in that as well. I'll pass on to you. Yeah.
Yes. So I want to talk a little bit about managing your inner critic. And there are probably many approaches to this, and it would be great if we had more time to look at, what other people think about this. But let's just start with some really key things around how you can manage that really strong, harsh voice that you hear. The first is that absolute acceptance and acknowledgement that we will have automatic negative thoughts. When things go wrong, or when we're not feeling great, we're going to have thoughts, okay? But to recognize that they are just that, they're thoughts. We don't necessarily have to act on our thoughts. We then don't have to add to that negative thought about ourselves. So I think the first thing is acceptance of our thoughts and acknowledging that we will have these automatically. And then how do you respond when you are feeling these things? Well, first of all, you need to notice your physical, emotional sensations within your body, and to notice the thoughts, and then to just pause and breathe. I think that's so important to, again, not necessarily having to be reactive, but to step back and try and there's a phrase called name it to tame it. So name what's going on for you, name the emotion, name the thought, in order to then be able to manage it. So when things go wrong or we don't feel good about ourselves, just start by acknowledging that we have these thoughts and that we can better manage them as well. And a really important strategy that comes really from cognitive behavioral therapy is called cognitive reframing and recognizing unhelpful thinking habits. And this is really important to do when you are aware that you are thinking unhelpfully and your inner critic is, really flaring up. Start to record your thoughts. Okay. Now, what you're going to try and do is get to a point where you record your thoughts and you challenge them and you do it automatically. But to start with, it's quite hard to do that. So write it down, because that way, the process of seeing those thoughts down on paper, you start to realize, that's not particularly helpful that I'm telling myself right now. And you start to check their validity. And I think that's important. And we're not talking about just when we start to check their validity, we're not talking about being positive for the sake of being positive. We're actually trying to be realistic in our thinking. So for example, if I think that my boss is going to fire me every time in my own sort of perception or view of it, that I don't perform well, what am I doing there is I'm catastrophizing. I'm almost mind reading that, he or she thinks that I'm bad. And what we need to then do, the cognitive reframing is saying, what's a more helpful way of looking at this? How can I look at this in a different way and, you know, feel better about myself? So I think many of us are aware of our thoughts, but are we aware of challenging our thoughts? And that's what cognitive reframing is. You might have heard of the tyranny of the shoulds, which is basically where we're saying a lot to ourselves. I should do this, I must do this. And what we're doing is we're putting a lot of pressure on ourselves, and we're trying to, you know, live up to maybe unrealistic expectations. You know, that idea, maybe we sometimes say, I should never be angry, or I should be happy all the time. Yeah. And it's quite a rigid way of thinking. And again, the more we notice these patterns of unhelpful thinking, the more that we can challenge them and give ourselves messages that allow us to have greater options or greater ways or other ways of thinking of it. So when we have a very strong inner critic, what we want to try and develop is that inner champion. And I'm going to pass over in a minute to Jennifer, who's going to talk a little bit about how you can develop that inner critic from that unhelpful voice. But it's all part of being kind to yourself. And this is, you know, lots of research into self-compassion and how important it is to be kind to ourselves. And sometimes this inner critic is so, you know, it's mean. It says some really horrible things to us. And it's about sort of almost, you know, turning that around, talking to yourself in a way that you would be, you know, promoting yourself and championing you. And also maybe just recognizing that, you know, you might make mistakes in life, but, you know, that's okay, and to forgive yourself. And I think that's a really important part of managing the inner critic as well. And having a fresh perspective, you know, how can you, when you hear that voice inside your head, is there another way you could think of it? Some people say, you know, imagine your best friend was talking to you right now. You know, what would they say to you? Or a trusted colleague? Yeah. How could you flip round what you're saying to yourself? Sometimes people think about, you know, imagine if you were talking to a young relative. Would you talk to a young relative in that way? No. So how could you say to yourself in a much kinder way, you know, and support yourself? And a fresh perspective might be also using some humor. Recognize that your inner critic, what your inner critic is doing, and be aware of maybe the use of humor or looking at it in a different way. Caroline's already mentioned the importance of mindfulness practice. It is so key, especially around noticing your thoughts and your physical sensations, and deciding where you want to put the spotlight, whether you want to focus on that or not. And I think mindfulness helps you to manage your inner critic, making you more aware of sort of that negative, judgmental and sort of limiting thoughts that you have about yourself, because you notice it more when you're practicing mindfulness as well. And then just the final 2 points on here are so key. You know, you will have that inner critic will tell you all the things that you haven't done. Will flip it. Remember all the things that you have done, your strengths and your achievements. If you're having a really bad attack of your inner critic, you know, go back and look and think back and think about all the things that you have achieved in your life, the things that you've overcome, the resilience you've shown. And in terms of, you know, your work performance, all of the things that you've done well, okay? And remember that and sort of tune into that sort of inner critic. And obviously, when we are feeling low like this and we are saying things that are kind of negative to ourselves, yes, we can do some work on it ourselves, but, you know, talk to seek support from people who are good, who will listen and challenge you back on your inadequacy. Sometimes we can't do it for ourselves, but, you know, if we talk to a good friend, they'll say, you know, you're being really hard on yourself. So seek out those colleagues and friends who will challenge you to be kinder to yourself, and also look for those allies in the workplace as well, the mentors and the formal and the informal mentors who will really boost you and find the positives that you have that you are perhaps not seeing in yourself. And coaching does that as well. So I'm going to pass back to Jennifer. who's going to give you some examples of changing those critical thoughts into, you know, the inner champion.
Right, thank you, Jayne. And as you rightly say, the inner critic can be really cruel sometimes. So that's why it's really important to try to develop that inner champion, so that we are challenging those negative thoughts, and starting to rationalize them, and reframing them, as Jayne said as well. So we have a couple of examples here on screen of the inner critic thoughts, the self-critical thoughts, and we're going to look at them individually and see if we can then use the inner champion in order to reframe them. So the statement that we heard right at the very beginning, that I'm not good enough, let's take that and see what we can do with that with regard to the inner champion. So is this what you really think about yourself? Is the first thing to consider here? Or is it a statement that is really just getting in the way of you being productive or moving forward in some way? So to rationalise that, we can start to reframe it with, I know I can do this. I've done similar in the past. I will do my best and I'll work out what needs to be done. So what we're doing here is drawing on evidence of the resilience and the skills that we've demonstrated in the past, along with our willingness to try and our ability to problem solve, and to start to put things into action to move forward. So we're really drawing on quite a lot of skills here, but we're capturing that negative thought and reframing it. The next one we have on the screen here, I might fail. Yes, you might fail. After all, we can't get it right all of the time, but you might also learn new things while you're trying. And again, this is highlighting our ability and our desire to learn in the moment, but critically being prepared to put ourselves out of that comfort zone in order to do that, which can be really, really scary. And again, we've all been there, and as I say, it can take quite a lot of effort and a lot of practice to come to that thought process. But it's, again, reframing, I might fail. Yes, you might, but what's the worst that can come from that? We might actually learn something from it. The last one here we've got on screen, I always get it wrong. Is that true? I doubt it. So let's look at how we can reframe that again. So I'm human. I think that's what we all acknowledge right at the very beginning. And yeah, it's okay to make mistakes. And again, we all make mistakes at different points. It's unlikely you're going to make mistakes every time, but I will try and I'll work out what I need to do. So what we're starting to see here is thinking about the workplace in particular, and studies you want to embark upon, or new projects you want to put yourself forward for in the workplace. By challenging our inner critic and allowing our inner champion to start to come through, we're developing the ability to stay focused, we're maintaining that positivity, we're continuing to look forward, and we're also reminding ourselves that yes, it's okay not to get it right every time. It's simply important for us to try. If we keep trying, then we'll start to move forward. It might take some time, it might take some practice, and we might need to keep reminding ourselves and capturing those thoughts, but we will get there. So try to practice that, capture those negative thoughts and challenge those in order to use the inner champion to reframe that. And by doing that, you're starting to put yourself into a stronger position so that you can lead forward in a positive manner, which leads us nicely on to Caroline's final slides here, knowledge is power.
Thank you. I just love that, how it's all very connected. You know, everything that Jayne and Jennifer mentioned. So this is, I mean, this slide pretty much speaks for itself, because it's one thing to be said that, hey, you know, we're all equal, you know, women are equal as men. I mean, to my humble opinion, I don't think women and men are equal. I think we each have our strengths and, you know, challenges. So that said, when it comes to equality and especially in the workplace, gender equity goes beyond fairness, you know, beyond, hey, women too, you know, that it's past that. It's really about the ROI when it comes specifically for focusing in business and women in business. It is serious ROI. And why do we say knowledge is power? Is because if we know our worth and if we know what we bring to the table, then everything that you ladies talked about, it makes it even more valuable, you know, because women, this is fact, we predict the worst when it comes compared to men, you know. And there's a study that showed that when it comes to job application, for example, when men meet 60% of the job criteria they put in their application, but women need to meet 100% of the job criteria before they put in their application. So that's how, you know, so knowing, why is this important? Because when you know your value and your worth and what you bring to the table, then it will make it so much easier to overcome that fear, the imposter syndrome that you were talking about, the self-doubt that you were talking about. So I know we all know how to read, but please, let's focus on this. That 87% of the top 500 companies last year, led by female decision maker, reported above average profit. And this wasn't just one study, there was several studies. So it wasn't just a one-off. And then looking at the bigger picture, the GDP could increase 26% by equally diversing the workplace. So this is, I mean, it's, you know, talk about, you know, I want to sit at the table. It's not about that. We need to be there. We have to be there because we're increasing the ROI. And I'm going to use one of my favorite quotes here from Cheryl Chisholm that says, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. You know, if you know that you belong there, especially if you have the experience, if you think, hey, I need coaching. I know I belong to the table, but I need coaching. I need education. Go get it. You know, it's we live in an era that, especially with technology and everything, that we actually have the luxury of getting what we want to get compared to, I don't know, even 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Go get it. Get a seat at the table. You might have to move the table sometimes, you know, have the courage to do it. Bring your folding chair. If you think you need to buy a new table, buy a new table, because you're actually making a difference, and you having a seat at a table makes a difference in many ways, and including, again, because we're focusing on business, their return on investment.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll be happy to just read quickly through these quotes, being mindful of time. So, you know, Michelle Obama, I'm her biggest fan. Confidence sometimes need to be called from within. I have repeated the same words to myself many times now through many clients. Am I good enough? Yes, I am. I've learned that the mastery of self-doubt is the key to success. And this is all work in progress. It's not going to happen overnight, right? Doubt kills more dreams than failure ever will. And it's, again, because it comes from within. The only impossible journey is the one you never begun, which is, I mean, it's so simple, but it's so deep, because if you never take the first step, then you're not walking, right? And my favorite out of all these quotes, everything is within your power, and your power is within you. So it all comes to you, and you got this.
Right. Thank you so much, Caroline, for that. We're almost out of time. We are actually out of time, but just very quickly before we go into questions, it's just to make you aware that there are some references here at the end that you will be able to access from the slide deck when you get them through. So I'm going to stop sharing, and so we can see, I can see there's a couple of questions come through on the chat. If we can just see if we can quickly deal with those before we finish up. Let's see, we are at time. We've got our inner critic seems like a drama queen. Love it. Going to start telling mind to mind her own business. Good for you, Jamie. I'm really pleased to hear that. That's such a nice idea. You're going to take control there, it sounds of it. And Jayne, yeah, you're just reminding us that we're out of time for questions, unfortunately. So thank you so much, Jayne and Caroline, for contributing to today. Really appreciate it. And for those attending and those watching the webinar, the recording, I hope you've gained a lot from the webinar today, and you've gained some hints and tips in terms of how to acknowledge that inner critic, working out how to manage the imposter syndrome, and also paying attention to your own mental health in the process while you're moving forward, and celebrating your inner champion as well. And Jamie, you're asking, will we have access to the referent resources? You'll be able to access those from the links in the slide deck when they come through after the webinar event itself. Okay, so thank you for joining, everybody. It's been great to see
Thank you.
and we'll see you again soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.